I started getting calls from parents saying my child was perfectly normal. They stopped sleeping at night, they were screaming, they were in pain. The lights went out in their eyes was a very common description. Doctors say, this is just part of autism. Get over it, put your child in a home, have another child and forget about it.
What were they thinking?
This is their quote, we are not going to be left with an orphan drug. And so it was decided to avoid that, they would put it into one-day-old infants.
Do vaccines cause autism? When I was a boy, it was the left that was skeptical of vaccines, thought that there might be a link between vaccines and autism. It was the left-wing shows that promoted this idea. Now, politics has flipped upside down. It's people on the right who suspect that vaccines might cause autism or other adverse health effects. It's the people on the left who are defending Big Pharma. You've now got Bobby Kennedy, who was a Democrat. He's a Kennedy, for goodness sakes. He's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services for Donald Trump, who previously had been kind of a Democrat. Now he's the Republican president. And here I am, still totally ignorant of vaccines. So I figured I'd call in a man who is at the center of this controversy, and that is Dr. Andy Wakefield. Dr. Wakefield, thank you for coming on the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much.
For the people who don't know who you are, you published the study in the 1990s that suggested adverse health effects from the MMR vaccine. And you have also been the chief target of everyone who wants to defend all vaccines, really, and especially the MMR vaccine. According to, I think it was David Weldon, former congressman who was nominated for CDC under Trump, you are the most unfairly vilified man on planet Earth. And I said, well, is that true? Let me look up a little bit about Andy Wakefield. And I know you certainly have the best Wikipedia page I've ever seen. Now, some of my friends have been unfairly maligned on Wikipedia as conspiracy theorists, hoaxsters, bigots, whatever. The first line of your biography on there is Andrew Wakefield is a fraudster and a former medical doctor and a this and a that and a this and a that. Take me back to the beginning. Before you were one of the most politically controversial figures on the planet, you're a doctor.
Well, there I was. It was 1981. I graduated in medicine from St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. I was one of 5 generations, now 6 generations of my family to graduate from that medical school. Medicine was really in our blood, I suppose you could say. And I was entirely mainstream, whatever that means. And I had a specific interest in inflammatory bowel disease. I got my fellowship with the Royal College of Surgeons, my fellowship with the Royal College of Pathologists, and I was running a research team at the Royal Free, which was part of the university teaching hospitals at the University of London. And it was a very exciting time. We were making great progress, and we had started to examine the cause of inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, colitis, and had made some very interesting observations in the context of natural measles infection and unusual exposures to natural measles leading to these diseases. And in 1995, I started getting calls from parents, highly articulate, intelligent parents, saying my child was perfectly normal. They had speech-language interaction with their siblings. They were sleeping well, eating well, growing well. And then they had their MMR vaccine. I wasn't anti-vaccine, doctor. I took them to be vaccinated on time. And within a very short space of time after the vaccine, they lost all their skills. Speech language gone, their eyes glazed over, the lights went out in their eyes was a very common description. They stopped sleeping at night, they were screaming, they were in pain. I knew they were in pain, even though they lost the ability to communicate. As their mother, I knew they were suffering. And I said, you know, how can I help? They said, well, they were eventually diagnosed with autism. And I said, I know nothing about autism. You must have got the wrong number.
Because even this part of the story is pretty shocking. It's not as though you started out investigating autism. As you say, you were investigating gut issues.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do you go from investigating measles and vaccines and gut issues to autism?
Well, that's exactly the question I asked them. I said, I know when I was at medical school, autism was so rare,
Yeah.
we weren't even taught about it. There was no class on autism.
I think
1 in
I saw.
10,000 children.
Yes, no. Whatever statistic I saw, it said in 1966 it was 1 in 2,500, and then in 2000 it was 1 in 150, and then today it's 1 in 36 kids is getting diagnosed with autism.
Even more, 1 in 31. 1 in 20 boys. It's more common in boys than girls.
How do you explain that?
Well, that's a very good question. So this is what the parents brought to my attention. They said, Doctor, my child has intractable gastrointestinal problems, diarrhea, alternating constipation and diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, failure to thrive, all the cardinal features of an underlying inflammatory bowel disease. But the doctors and nurses I've been to see doctors say, this is just part of autism. Get over it, put your child in a home, have another child and forget about it. I thought, I mean, this is extraordinary. I've never heard medicine respond in this way at all. Now, they said, the other thing, doctor, is there is an epidemic of this problem, of developmentally normal children suddenly losing their skills and becoming autistic. And so I said, okay, now the fundamental rule of clinical medicine, okay, let's go right back to the beginning, is to listen to the parents. No one knows children like their parents, particularly the mother.
Yeah.
There is a connection there that no pediatrician can usurp. Okay, so it is the golden rule is you put all of your biases aside and you listen to the parents. What are they telling me? Is there a consistency to this story? Is there a coherence? Is it possible that an underlying inflammatory bowel disease can interact with the brain and damage it? We don't know, but certainly in diseases like celiac disease, where there is an allergic sensitivity to gluten in wheat, then the presenting features can be dementia or seizures or developmental regression or autism. So yes, there is a link. We don't know what the nature of that link is, but yes, there is a plausible link. And I said to the Department of Health once, you know, if I take you for a pint of beer, you may begin to understand what I'm talking about. They thought I was trying to offer them to go out for a beer and enjoy their company. Nothing could be further from the truth. What I was saying is if you drink a pint of beer within a very a short period of time, you will feel the cerebral effects of that pint of beer on your brain. There is a gut-brain connection. This isn't difficult.
Even simply, if you take alcohol out of it, you know, some women in my life, if they are a little late to lunch, they get a bit hangry, okay? You see emotional and psychological connections.
Yeah, we are one entity.
You're
this
right.
is not separate from this. You know? So I thought, right, we need to look at this, put all of our biases aside, whether my children were vaccinated or not, nothing to do with it. They're telling us a story that we have to act upon. And this is serious. It's clearly serious because until proven otherwise, these children have an intestinal disease. And if it's correctable, can we make their lives at least bearable, if not reverse some element of what's going on? So I put together a large team of some of the best people in the world. The leading pediatric gastroenterologist in the world, Professor John Walker-Smith, and his team from St. Bartholomew's Hospital, psychiatrists, neurologists, and people. And we came together and we investigated these children according to their clinical need. It wasn't research, according to their clinical need. John Walker-Smith, the leader of the clinical team, made the decision that these children merited investigation. And lo and behold, when we scoped them, we biopsied, we looked at the biopsies under the microscope, there was inflammation. The parents were right. And when we treated that inflammation with the kind of medication that we would use for Crohn's or colitis, anti-inflammatories, dietary intervention, removal of gluten and cow's milk products from the diet, there was a dramatic improvement. Again, these insights had come from parents. We'd followed up on those insights, and they were true.
There's a dramatic improvement
incredible.
in the symptoms of autism.
Of not just the bowel symptoms, but the cognitive symptoms as well. And people say, well, they were just out of pain, they were feeling better, they were asleep. No, this was children who were using words that they had not used for 5 years. Words that, you know, you would have disappeared from their vocabulary were all in there. They came back. Because
your critics say, well, sure, maybe the autism symptoms set in around the time that kids are vaccinated. However, that's just the time. It's just coincidental The time that you get the vaccines is around the time that autism symptoms manifest. But what you're saying is, yeah, but hold up, when we started treating the gastrointestinal issues, the vaccine symptoms started to subside. So it can't just be a mere coincidence here, because we did something, we intervened, and that had an effect on the autism symptoms.
Yes, you had an exposure and a withdrawal effect, just as you say. They were fine, they weren't fine, they improved. And those time points were punctuated by their exposure to the vaccine and then their removal of these potential toxins from the diet. And the historical teaching of the experts in autism was that symptoms manifest from birth. Autism is genetic and it starts from birth. Suddenly it was, oh no, the symptoms manifest at 15, 18 months. That's not what you said. That's not what it says in the textbooks. You say regression. So here's the key is that where do you go from here? Because the parents had said, my child was fine, they regressed. They regressed in many cases after a vaccine. They have a bowel disease until proven otherwise. The diet works and they can improve. The expert opinion at that time is, my dear boy, children are autistic from birth, it's genetic. There is no regression, no developmental or behavioral regression. There is no link with any kind of underlying bowel disease. That's just incidental. There is no improvement. The diet has no effect at all. The medical experts, God save us from medical experts, were wrong on every single count. You could take that library of textbooks written by experts and burn it to the ground for the value of the story from one parent telling you what actually happened. It is an extraordinary reiteration of that fundamental rule of medicine, and something that we've largely forgotten in our arrogance in medicine, to listen to the parents, because they were right on every count. Now, when they say, I believe my child regressed after a vaccine, with that knowledge, do we dismiss their story? Do we say, actually, you may be right, but this isn't going to be good for my career, so would you take your child and leave this room and shut the door behind you? Thank you. That's what happened.
That is what
was happening.
Yeah.
And that's not what I signed up for. That's not what I went into medicine. I didn't have a bias one way or the other about whether the vaccine was involved, but there was a moral and professional obligation to investigate, to answer their questions. Because if it were true that there is an epidemic of this particular problem, then we need to know this. If you are a doctor, however eminent, you stand up and you criticize, say, COVID vaccine policy, that's the end of your job. Doesn't matter how many papers you publish, doesn't matter how eminent you are finished. The way in which the system historically now deals with this kind of problem is to simply cut the person's head off.
Except, just on the COVID example, we were told by the eminent public health experts and by the politicians who employed them that the COVID vaccine was totally safe. It turned out it was not. People died. That it was totally effective in preventing you from contracting COVID. Those very same public health experts shortly thereafter admitted, actually, it doesn't stop you from receiving the infection. However, it'll stop you from transmitting it. Shortly after that, those very same health experts told us it actually doesn't stop you from transmitting the virus, but it'll ameliorate the conditions. It'll reduce the danger of hospitalization or whatever. My only point on that is, those same public health experts admitted that the things they had just previously said as gospel truth were not true. So already there's a major credibility issue for the public health experts in recent memory.
Yeah. And so people know that now, they're familiar with it. And the doctors who stood up against them were bankrupted by legal fees, were removed from their positions, had their licenses taken away. These were some outstanding clinicians, outstanding academics, and they were just trashed.
Can I ask you what might be a stupid question?
Not at all.
Because you're mentioning a rival vaccine, potentially, that could have been patented. Why is it? I mean, I think of this as a parent. I got 3 young kids. Why is it that all the doctors are pressuring me to get the MMR vaccine when there's a measles outbreak? So I say, well, can my kid just get the measles vaccine? Why does he have to get measles, mumps, and rubella all at the same time? You know, the vaccine schedule today is so much more intense than it was even when I was a kid, and certainly decades prior. why can't I just go get the M and then the other M and then the R? Why do I have to get them all at the same time? Is there some medical advantage to getting them all at the same time?
I don't mean to sound obsequious, but that's an outstanding question. No, really.
Oh, good.
And
All right. I'm glad
it was
it's
the
not a
question
dumb
I asked. I said, what I did is I went away and I researched this. So I was an academic. That's what you do. Before you're going to get embroiled in this, you go away and you read every paper you can get your hands on that looks at the pre-licensing studies of these vaccines, and you say, is there any merit? Have the safety studies been done? Yeah. And I went through it. I wrote a 250-page report. I thought, I must be missing something. I'm not doing these scientists credit who did the safety study. There must be something I'm missing. No, I wasn't. The safety studies on the vaccine were undertaken in small populations. They were not controlled trials. They were nothing that would have passed a drug trial for the FDA. And they were done on children in mental institutions because they were expendable. I was staggered by this when I found out, like Willowbrook State School in Manhattan, in Staten Island, New York, children whose lives were at the time deemed to be, they were up for experimentation. And this is where a lot of the vaccine safety trials were done, in children who were severely mentally and physically debilitated. And I thought, I can't believe this. This is staggeringly unethical. Yeah. On every level. There was no mention of fully informed consent whatsoever. And these children were just used as experimental subjects.
Bobby Kennedy right now is being blamed for the same thing that you've been blamed for decades, for this outbreak of measles. And I see it. I read it in the news all the time, and people ask me about, oh, you saw measles is breaking out in Texas, measles is breaking out in Tennessee. And even for me, and I'm pretty chill about these things. I don't stay up at night worried about the next great fear-mongering campaign in the media. But even I think, well, I don't want my kids to get measles, so is there anything to worry about?
Let me show you something I think you'll find absolutely fascinating. I don't know whether I'd love to be able to put this on camera, but this is a graph of measles mortality over the last 150 years. This is the UK, but the US is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So what you can see, these are the deaths per million children affected, okay? And what you can see is that measles, up until the 1920s, was a major killer. 120 per million children getting the measles. After 1920, it plummeted dramatically till it approached 0 deaths. Measles was still prevalent, but it was becoming a dramatically milder and milder disease. They will never show you this. Now, the source for this is Thomas McCowan's Modern Rise of Population, if anyone wants to look that up. Now, the question here is, what would have happened if we'd never intervened with vaccination? You can see that vaccines had nothing to do with this.
Right, because there's a little, little dot here. Immunization began. So it's already collapsed.
By 99.96%. What would have happened, here's the first scientific question, if we had never intervened with a vaccine? We don't know, because of course we did, but it would likely have continued to 0. It was becoming a dramatically milder disease. Now, there are many reasons for this: virus-related factors, human-related factors, better sanitation, better nutrition, decline in other infectious diseases that cause secondary pneumonias, for example. But the fact is, this is natural herd immunity in operation, and it is extraordinarily effective. Sir Graham Wilson, when they first entertained the idea of universal measles vaccination, was invited from the UK to talk at the NIH about whether they should do it or not. And he said, don't do it. You do not know what you're doing. You may alter the age of measles by pushing it out to the older age groups, younger age groups, when it may be more dangerous. 1 child per million, 100,000 in the UK may die during an epidemic. The same is true perhaps in America. He said, the question you should be asking is, what's different about that 1 child? What can we do to prevent the disease, the death in that 1 child, rather than giving every child a measles vaccine about which you know nothing in terms of the long-term consequences?
There seem to be a lot of parallels here to COVID, which was COVID comes out. very quickly it's clear COVID does not really pose much of a risk to little babies, actually, or to healthy young people. Maybe there's a risk to older people or people who have immune system conditions, but the vast majority of people did not face a major risk from COVID. And yet, rather than the government going out and saying, okay, the people who maybe are at risk, maybe they should take the vaccine, even if it's experimental, even if it's really recent, instead, every single person, all these young, healthy people, were mandated to get it.
Yes, I think COVID, the whole COVID experience was the biggest mistake they ever made, because it caused people like yourself and others to say, hang on a minute, we've been lied to. The experts told us this, none of what they said was sustainable, and yet we've been compromised, both economically, our jobs, financially, health-wise, by this draconian policy.
Politically, I mean, you could, just socially, you couldn't hug your loved ones as they were dying of old age. You couldn't go to Christmas. You had to postpone your wedding. You couldn't go to school. You couldn't, they just destroyed our lives for years with apparently no medical basis for it.
Yes, and that's what turns out. And there is a realization globally. I mean, when I first got involved in this, there were perhaps a handful of people worldwide who were prepared to discuss the thorny issue of vaccine safety. Now it's more than half the adult population of the world. And that is because of their mistakes, not because of me. It's no good blaming me or you having, you because you had me on the show. This is at their door. This is their mistake. They have done this and they only have themselves to blame. And they will attrite public confidence in public health policymakers by everything that they've done. As the truth emerges, as Bobby Kennedy gets to the root cause of these problems. And there'll be a lot of pushback, a lot of politicizing, a lot of money changing hands. But I'm afraid that the inevitable will turn out to be true. What is that? That the parents' original story was faithful and correct, and merely sought to say, this is what happened to my child.